Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this session that is about climate action as we all are concerned and connected to action in this COP. And as many of you might know, this is my first COP. I've just joined the process in the last 8 months. In those 8 months, coming from the real world, I learned a lot of acronyms, sure. I learned also that it's a lot about diplomacy. I learned that it's really hard to reach agreements, but it's really fabulous when we do so. We have somehow the role as the champions to become a bridge between the non-party stakeholders and the UNFCCC process, and somehow create a virtuous process that is feasible. So when non-party stakeholders take into consideration the possibility on developing actions to help the parties to increase ambition, and then by doing so, what happens is that parties then can define policies, and those policy frameworks will allow non-party stakeholders to accelerate their actions. That is the virtuous circle that we need to develop, to increase, to strengthen. At the end, it's about you help us to help you. What we have seen in the, let's say, the way from Paris to Madrid, the pre-2020 action, 5 years of climate action, we have seen, I would say, enough evidence to celebrate. We have seen, of course, the Nazca platform that was born in 2015 with 2,900 actions, and now the Nazca platform in 2019 has 22,000 actions. In 5 years, almost 30% of increase of participation from developing countries is so relevant to bring the Global South to this room, to this process. Almost 10,000 cities engaging on climate action. Over 6,000 companies representing more GDP than USA and China combined with climate action targets. In 5 years, we learned there's a huge contribution from non-party stakeholders to support governments on climate action to reduce emissions and build a resilient future. In 2019, we hold 3 regional climate weeks that is allowing us and has allowed us during this year to touch the ground, to see how much we can do while getting to know those players in the ground, those that are developing the action and then help us accelerate in every region of the world. Finally, the technical examination process. It's providing recommendations for policymakers, aligning financial flows with needs and incentivizing private sector investment, enhancing adaptation technologies, designing effective policy frameworks. All of that was taken into consideration when the SG called for a summit last September. And for that summit in September, Chile led the mitigation track with the determination to invite all actors under the same goal, following science to the 1.50 emission target by 2050. That was the main concept by which we brought different actors. We engaged them with the Marrakesh Partnership as a great tool that we, the champions, have in order to bring all non-party stakeholders, and therefore all of them brought their initiatives to reach the goal. What happened in September was highlighted by the SG. We know it. But let me tell you, 66 countries, 10 regions under the Under 2 coalition, 102 cities under 340 and deadline 2020, 93 businesses with combined market cap of 2.3 trillion under the UN Global Compact, investors managing 2.54 trillion who joined the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. But here's when magic happens. So in 3 months, only in 3 months, regions, about, of course, non-party stakeholders, now 14 regions, including 12 in Under 2 coalition. We have committed to reach net zero emissions by 2050 or earlier. Cities, we moved from 102 to 398 cities. 112 megacities under deadline 2020, 200 local cities under the Argentinian network of municipalities, 130 cities under ICLE, who will work in 2020 strengthening the criteria and alignment on climate neutrality targets by developing additional guidance to maximize emission reduction impact. That group represents over 660 million people. Businesses, from 93 to 786 businesses. 177 under business ambition for 1.5 degrees through the UN Global Compact. That represents the equivalent of 83 coal-fired power plants, or the total annual emissions of France. Entire sectors are demonstrating how much they can commit and aggregate to this goal. So the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, whose 85 signatories share a fundamental commitment to drive the fashion industry to net zero emissions in line with the goal of the Paris Agreement no later than 2050. And when it comes to investors, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance grew from 2.4 trillion to nearly $4 trillion in assets under management. That is the example of how much the Alliance on Climate Ambition grew only in 4 months. But also, during those 3-4 months, we called for pioneers. For we all know that the world has to become carbon neutral by 2050. And in order to reach that goal, we need some others that are capable of delivering the impact way before. So what we did is we provoked a group of business leaders of the world called the Certified B Corporations. Those companies that are putting these commitments into their bylaws. Those companies were provoked in a call for action in September. And now you will see what happened. Show you a video.
Michael Chef from the UK
commits to net zero by 2030.
Digital storytellers
from Melbourne, Australia
commits to net zero
by 2030.
Ambiente from Milan.
The Cop from Italy
commits to net zero
by 2030.
Better Barista from Singapore.
From Singapore.
From Cape Town, South Africa.
From Turkey.
from Portugal.
Uruguay.
From Ibiza, Spain.
Medellín, Colombia.
Cusco, Peru commits to net zero.
Commits to become carbon neutral.
Se compromete a la carbono neutralidad
Al 2030.
by 2030.
By 2030.
By 2030.
By 2030.
al 2030.
For 2030.
By 2030.
By 2030.
Alright, this time we're going to go a bit more excited.
The Cheeky Panda.
The Delphi Group.
Tanya Ellis.
Scandinavians.
Save the Dark.
Red de Lima, Perú.
De Santiago de Chile. From Melbourne, Australia.
From
Beijing in China.
Commits to net zero.
Commits to net zero
By 2030.
By 2030.
By 2030.
by 2030.
by 2030. Let's go.
Namaste Solar from USA.
Commits to net zero.
By 2030.
Natura Cosméticos Brasil.
Carbon neutrality.
By 2030.
By 2030.
En 2030.
Você aceita esse desafio?
I think they want a round of applause. What I wanted to bring to the parties is a possibility, a feasible dream. There are many, many people, companies, cities, regions, investors that are willing to collaborate. They want and they need to be part of the solutions. They want to integrate their commitments, their purpose, to what the world requires and what the party requires. This is one concrete example of what, on one side, the big companies, well aggregated by the UN Global Compact, are willing to do in order to lead different industries, and then the diversity that the B Corp community is showing in terms of now there's no excuse why not to join.